What up, though? It's your brother Mike X with another episode of 17 Winners Podcast. Y'all know, y'all been listening long enough to know that the way that I do this is I'm usually talking to people who are formerly incarcerated, who did some time, and not just did time, but also like committed the crime. This is not the Innocence Project. This is not for people who are not actual offenders, in general, I'll say. But this is a very special episode because we are, one, speaking to somebody who doesn't necessarily fit that lane or fit that description, but also because of what is coming up in the next couple of weeks. It's election season, we all know, and I wanted to take the time to specifically talk about second look legislation. And in doing that, I figured I know enough about it for my own personal benefit, but I wanted to talk to somebody who was more of an expert on that in order to help you guys understand it a little bit better and see where we could maybe get some more energy behind it and get it going. So this episode, I am not talking to somebody who was formerly incarcerated. I'm actually talking to somebody who has not been incarcerated before, which is actually a welcome change because we need perspectives from all over the board. So with that being said, I want to introduce my guest for today, the director of MI-CEMI, Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration, Chuck Warpehoski. And I guess I don't even want to start to do the introduction for you. So I'll allow Chuck to kind of give us a little bit of backstory about you, like kind of where you from. Mm-hmm. I'll get into it a little bit further as you started explaining, but just give us a quick little introduction and then we'll go from there.
Sure thing. Happy to be here. Really appreciate the introduction. So my name is Chuck Warpehoski, project director here at Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. Been here with MI-CEMI for about 3 years now, but I've been doing various kinds of justice work for close to 20 years. A lot of that time was in Ann Arbor working with an interfaith organization, and the idea there was, okay, you've got some people are Christian, some people are Jewish, some people are Muslim, some people are Buddhist. They're different. Like, we don't want everybody to be the same, but at the same time, there's common ground, right? There's shared teachings about respect for everybody, about care for the earth. So how do we respect those differences and find some common ground when it deals with things like police accountability or affordable housing? And so did a lot of that work. 6 of those years, I was also on Ann Arbor City Council, so on the policing accountability side of it. So a lot of issues come through in terms of how do we make sure that we have policies with our police department that are trying to improve the relationships and start to deconstruct some of the racial imbalances and excessive policing we saw. I'm not going to say we got it all right. We definitely got some of it wrong. But that was some of my background in social justice stuff, criminal justice policy, and that's part of what brought me here to MI-CEMI.
So I guess the first question that I ask about that, mind you, we're not doing a video episode this episode, so the viewers can't see you. So let me give you a quick description, right? If we're talking about a white guy, I'm talking to a white guy, right? We're talking 40s, the average 40-year-old white guy who has a job, family, 2.5 kids, the wholesome idea, right?
It is really hard to find clothes that fit that 0.5 kid, though, right? Like, just the one half shirt, like, I don't know where to get it. It's tough.
And that was the thing. Chuck's got the dad jokes, right? So that being said, though, Chuck, I guess with that being the description that I would give, right, on first glance, what the hell are you doing in this work? Like, why do you even care about social justice work? How did you get here?
Yeah. So part of it for me, social justice broadly, like for me personally, I mentioned that interfaith thing. My personal faith background is Quaker.
Okay.
And part of the Quaker faith is what's called a testimony on integrity.
Okay.
We want to always be acting in integrity with the world. So part of that means I'm not getting more than I deserve, and I'm also not giving somebody less than they deserve.
Okay.
And so for me, starting from that integrity testimony, when I look at racial justice issues, if I am, because I'm a white guy, because I'm a geeky white guy with the dad jokes, if somebody's like, I trust him, I think he can do the job, and just based on that bias, if doors are open for me that aren't open for you, not only does that hurt you, I'm going to say that also hurts me. Like, sure, it helps my bank account. No lie there. But it means I am not in integrity because I'm getting something I didn't deserve, whether or not I asked for it. So when we look at all of this racial justice stuff, I believe that the racism absolutely harms people of color. To some degree, it does materially benefit white folk like me. But it also, I think there's other kinds of harm that we as white folk experience. And so if we're going to be a movement, an everybody movement, as a white person, I need to be able to fess up to the things that I get that I didn't deserve because of my whiteness and because of white racial privilege. Again, I'm not asking for it. I'm not trying to
it's just coming to you.
And then I need to take steps to try to make that right for myself, for my son, and for others who are in the community. And so that's like big picture, some of the why I'm involved in social justice work. And when you look at what is one of the major drivers of racial inequality today in the United States, it's our criminal legal system. It's the disproportionate treatment, it's the over-policing, it's the over-punishment, it's criminalizing things that we should find other ways to address, like substance use disorder. And so if I say that I'm committed to racial equity, it's, and I've got this ability to try to figure out how the policy world works and how to bring people from different perspectives together, looking at the criminal justice system is an obvious place to put my hand to the plow and try to get something done.
That makes sense. That makes great sense. The New Jim Crow. You ever read that book?
I got about 2/3 through it, yeah.
So I understand because that happens with me as well with a lot of books. But that was a book that really impacted me from, from an outside perspective because I read it in prison. Mm-hmm. So like I was reading it inside the cell like, okay, of course it applies to me, right? But it allowed me to kind of step outside of my prison cell and look at the overall system as a thing, right? Because I guess I'm one of those people who feels like, man, I did it. When I was in the streets, I wasn't of the illusion that I'm going to get away with this for the rest of my life, right? I always had in my head, you'll get caught eventually, you'll go to prison, and then that will be, your next level in the street game, I guess, right? So it never occurred to me that this was a bigger thing than you commit a crime, you go to jail. I always considered it just to be part of the game that I was playing. After reading that book, it became a bigger issue to me. It became something that, wait a minute, now some things are like made illegal that wouldn't necessarily be illegal, or some things are more severely punished in targeted areas versus others. So that really had a big shift, gave me a big shift. So you say you've been in Michigan Collaborative for 3 years. Talk to me a little bit about Michigan Collaborative and what they do. Okay, so wait a minute before we even get there. Newsflash, I got a new job, guys. I forgot to tell you, I have not made that announcement on the podcast or anywhere, I guess, publicly yet because, first of all, it's tough to tell, like, my personal life on social media and stuff. I try to get involved, but that's still a barrier for me. But also because it's just stuff going on. I just didn't make the announcement yet, but I am now the program coordinator at MI-CEMI, Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. So let's talk about MI-CEMI a little bit. I guess give me a little bit of history of MI-CEMI, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So you set it up great when you talked about the new Jim Crow, because when that book hit, all of a sudden, before that, there were just a few groups who were on the scene doing work around criminal justice policy. There was AFSC. At the time, there was a group called CAPS. There was Michigan Council for Crime and Delinquency. So basically 3 groups doing anything, and ACLU is doing some. But otherwise, people are ignoring the issue. All of a sudden, Michelle Alexander comes in with New Jim Crow. People's eyes open up and like, oh, here's the problem. And then around the same time, around 2006, 2008, we've got a state budget crisis, and the state's trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to make this budget balance when so much of our spend is going out to the prison system? We don't have money for the roads. We don't have money for the schools. We don't have money for the hospitals, any of that stuff. So all of a sudden, more and more groups started showing up. Grassroots groups just popping up around somebody's kitchen table, national groups parachuting in saying, hey, we're from National. We know what you need to do in Michigan. That's how it goes.
Yes.
Unless we're ready for them to say, like, no, we've got a plan here. We know where you fit in. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're bringing your resources, but we're going to do this together. So some of the groups that were on the scene were realizing groups were working on the same issues, but they didn't know what was going on. They were duplicating efforts. Sometimes there were some sharp elbows and folks were stepping on toes because they each had their way they wanted to do it, and they didn't have any way to collaborate and to try to come up with a shared strategy, figure out how to get people in their right lanes and work together to address all the issues in the criminal justice system, from policing to courts to conditions to confinement to reentry, across the whole landscape. So MI-CEMI came in not to duplicate the work that any of those existing organizations was to do. Like the folks who founded us were very clear. They didn't want MI-CEMI to be competing for the grassroots organizing or the fundraising or the publicity. But they saw a role to have somebody who could help connect people behind the scenes, share resources, build strategy together, and that's what we do. So we have 6 areas we work for, programmatic. One is around incarceration prevention.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So that it can mean a lot of things, right? Because I know you've done some work with Advanced Peace here in Lansing. Advanced Peace is saying, like, look, we know some of the people and places where there is a risk of violence.
Yep.
And if we can get ahead of that, we can keep people out of the hospital, we can keep people out of the morgue, and we can prevent an incarceration, and we can prevent all that whole chain of events. Beautiful. Those programs need resources, they need technical know-how, they need sustainability. You don't see the fire department saying, how are we going to get funded next year?
Yeah.
But the groups like Advanced Peace, they're wondering when their funding is going to run out. So we need a stable funding source, so that kind of prevention work, that kind of public safety work is as built in as the funding for our ambulances is. It also means police accountability, right? So that the kinds of no-knock raids that killed Breonna Taylor we don't see those.
Yes, sir.
Or that if there's a mandate so that if one officer sees another officer using excessive force, there's a duty to intervene to say, hey, stop that, let him breathe. So there's a variety of things around police accountability that fit in there. There's diversion, so maybe somebody does commit a crime, but maybe prison's not the best opportunity. Maybe they need drug treatment. Maybe they need mental health treatment. Maybe they just need something else that's going to help them. Maybe it was a poverty crime. Maybe they need some job placement and career building assistance so that they've got other ways to pay the rent. Yeah. So there's a lot of ways that we can either prevent crime, or when there is a crime, try to have that as an off-ramp so it's not just back into that
cycle.
That cycle.
Jail.
That's it.
Okay.
The second area we work with is on length of stay. Michigan, you and I were on a call with Pete Martell from American Friends Service Committee the other day, and he's saying Michigan is the worst in the country when it comes to long sentences.
Yeah.
Not Louisiana, not Mississippi, not Alabama, Michigan.
And that was actually a surprise for me because I knew that we were at the top. I didn't know that we were the very worst for long sentences in the country. That is not shocking, but definitely wow.
Right. And to some degree, there's some good reasons why that's the case. One of the reasons is we don't have the death penalty. So
Right.
folks who would have been killed by the state are now getting life sentences. One of the reasons is we've taken out some of those low-lying offenses, and so that the average is up. You've got more people doing long time now that we've gotten a lot of the folks who did short sentences, clearing them out faster. And those are things I can be happy with, but we also just have this addiction to excessive punishment. Our sentences are longer now than they were 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So we keep getting more addicted to punishment.
Yeah.
So it's something we got to take care of.
Yeah.
And these are those long sentences for the people who are guilty. It's real harm, right? We're talking sexual assault, we're talking homicide. But the thing is, the data show that those are actually the crimes that have the lowest recidivism rate. They tend to be crimes of passion, they tend to be crimes of youth, people grow out of that stuff. And so if there's an accountability piece we need to have, But saying, okay, you made a mistake at 19 and now you got to spend the rest of your life behind bars, that's excessive. It doesn't keep us safe. And at $35,000 to $48,000 a year, that's a lot of money that, like you said earlier, could have been put into that prevention. So we're wasting lives, we're separating families, and we're taking money away from more effective ways to promote safety in community. So trying to figure out, and that's where the second look piece that we'll get to.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you said that, because I didn't want you to get too far off into it, because we're still talking about the pillars of MI-CEMI. We got prevention, we got long length of stay. We also have reentry as one of them. So let's talk about the reentry side. People coming home from prison, also mental health stuff.
Yep. So reentry, it's about removing barriers and making sure people have the support they need. So a lot of this, quite frankly, right now we're taking our lead from Nation Outside, because as an organization of by and for formerly incarcerated people, we're happy to let them set the agenda when it comes to reentry policy. So they're doing a lot of work right now on removing housing barriers for people who come home. Something we've talked about with the barriers that some people with records face.
Employment.
And one of the things we're trying to get cleaned up right now is also vital docs, right? A lot of folks have come home, and what do their parole conditions say? Get an apartment, get a job. You can't do that if you don't have your social security card. You can't do that if you don't have a state ID or driver's license. You can't do that if you don't have a birth certificate. Somebody's been locked up all that time. State's got time to get that all sorted out. It shouldn't be on somebody's shoulders when they come home. One more stress among all the mess of reentry, right? Like have that locked in, ready to go from the day they hit the streets back to community. So
for sure,
trying to improve the policies there.
For sure. And then our fourth pillar, why am I getting a brain fart? I didn't take notes. Give me a fourth pillar.
So the fourth pillar is programming.
Accessing the programming, of course, because how did I get here? Programming inside is what helped me to learn to be able to do the work that I do out here. Okay. So I guess to touch on the programming piece from my perspective, Chance for Life was a big deal for us inside of prison, specifically at Jackson Cooper Street, because those of us that were a part of the program there all had nearing out dates. Everybody else, I think there were like 11 institutions in Michigan that had the program in it, but the other 10 programs, institutions were full with people who were doing long-term sentencing. So they weren't able to really apply any of the things from the program to real life. Us at Jackson Cooper Street were allowed to, we literally rolled it right out the door, and many of us have become members at the tables of these organizations based on some of the training that we got from that type of program. So that's just my kind of touch on programming. If you wanted to elaborate some more.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. One is, that's a beautiful example. I think of programming, I've kind of expanded what matters. I think of it as anything that supports somebody's well-being and success for reentry. So yes, programming is part of it. But if somebody is from down here in Lansing, but they're sent up to Kinross and their family can't see them anymore, we know that lack of family contact undermines people's well-being. It creates problems inside, and it makes people less ready to reenter when they get released.
Right.
So access to family visits, access to being able to correspond, right? Like one of our members, Citizens for Prison Reform, is doing a lot of work. There's if you've got 2 misconducts that can take away your visits, they could be the same infraction, right? Like you might be found with
a knife.
Or with drugs in particular, they're finding it with. We found you with drugs and then you tested positive. That's 2 infractions off the same incident. Boom, you lost your visits.
That's exactly how visits are taken. Now that I think about it, if drugs come in and you get caught with a dirty, your visits are gone. I've had them taken before like that. Yeah, alcohol, but it was the same thing. It was, they found alcohol in the room and I tested dirty for alcohol. Visits gone for 6 months. Happened to be in Newberry, Michigan, so it didn't really matter. Nobody was coming to see me up there. But that's even a thing in and of itself, is the fact that if I live in Lansing, Michigan, why would I be housed in Newberry, Michigan, where my family couldn't even, we're already poor. We're already in conditions where we don't have it to travel and do extra things. So to try to travel 6 hours up north, stay the night at a hotel or something to try to see me and pay for whatever things that I want to eat on the visit and then make it back home. It's not likely happening for most prisoners coming from inner cities in Michigan getting sent up there. So right. I also like the programming piece that talks about having something productive going on in the daytime versus you're just in prison. Just because you're in prison, you're just here. So do you want to talk about that some more? Just it's just the whole idea of waking up with objectives for the day, because I had to create them on my own. If we had them, that would probably help to reinforce some work ethic.
It does. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this too, where somebody who's been down a long time and they get institutionalized. What have they had decades trained to do? They had decades trained to walk the yard, fill time, not get anything done.
Not get anything done.
But to just like do the time. And then they're out here and their boss is saying like, no, we expect you to get something done. That's a really big change. And the institutionalization of the current structure is like, no, you're just idle, right? Yeah. Like for a big part of your day, or you've got a brief call out. Your classes, it's nothing like working an 8-hour shift.
No.
So that's a big problem. And the other thing I wanted to lift up is you mentioned that Chance for Life was close to your out date. A lot of the programming is backloaded as people get close to their out date. And if you're talking something like resume writing, sure, makes sense. A couple years back, we did some re-entry focus groups with formerly incarcerated folk. I remember one of the guys out at 70 times 7 in Grand Rapids saying, why did you give me anger management classes 6 months before I came home? I needed those 10 years earlier when I came in. So making sure that those programming opportunities are across the time somebody's incarcerated, not just in the last little bit.
I didn't think about that either, because realistically, if I come in for violence and I'm not given any type of mental health or tools to help me work on the violence, I'm only going to be violent until I get new tools. So right. I'll either survive through these years in prison being violent, find my own tools, or I guess there is no or. It's those are the choices. You either find your own tools or just survive being violent until they put you in something.
Or it's the peer-led tools, like you talked about, have Mentor brought you under his wings, right? So it's it's not always on you, but if they're only put in the programming at the back end, it's they're not doing anybody any favors that way.
Yeah, for sure.
And I also think about my predecessor in this role, Danny Jones, may rest in power. He was a juvenile lifer, so when he got his resentencing come in, he didn't have a long runway for programming because they never gave him any programming when he was in, because they figured he was never getting out. He was doing life. Yep. So the other reason to front load some of the programming is we've got folks who are getting resentenced, getting out on appeal, found exonerated, commuted. If we're not giving them programming early because we figure they're never coming home or they're not coming home for another 1 or 2 decades, once that commutation, once that exoneration comes through, they're not set up to succeed.
True.
We're doing them dirty. So I think getting that programming earlier is especially important when we look at the folks who are wrongfully convicted, folks who are getting a second look somehow. It's like we need to have them set up for success, recognizing they may not have that same reentry glide path that you had, knowing your out date.
For sure. I actually had a episode with Shamar Avery. He's an actor out of Detroit, but he's also a friend of mine. We served about 6 years together. And that happened to him. He came in under a crime he didn't commit, served 9 years, and was walked off the yard after 9 years, completely exonerated. But the fallback of the complete exoneration is I've been in prison for 9 years learning how to be a prisoner, learning how to survive in an institution with criminals. And I wasn't one when I came. So now I have to respond to life as if I was one. No, I don't have the felony on my record, but I definitely have the weight on my jacket. It's still something that I'm carrying around. And so, yeah, we discussed that on the podcast as well. So, yeah, that is that was a great point. And it was also a great way to kind of transition into second look legislation. So you briefly touched on my mentor in prison. And I actually just recently re-released the episode where I discussed with him his circumstances. So he's been in prison since 1994. He has been sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, natural life in Michigan, for felony murder. He took part in a murder. He did not necessarily have the lead role, but he, lead role or not, because I want to get into that later as well. But and he has been trying to get back on a resentence or appeal of some sort for the 30 years. This man, largely, I credit with helping me to steer my life in a different direction. I don't give him the credit because I get that to God and then myself, because I had to actually do the stuff.
It was a team effort.
He was definitely a close third or fourth or something. Somebody who I was like, okay, well, if I would like to change, what would that change look like? And it would look similar to what this guy represented. He had integrity in a place where nobody's has integrity, right? Everybody's in here for lack of integrity, but he carried himself with integrity and he represented as a man. And that was in 2005, right? When I got close to him. I've been out of prison since 2015 and he's been fighting still since, even back when we were close together in prison, right? So I would consider him like the face or the example of the value of second look legislation, just based on the fact that a guy like him impacted a guy like me who has been able to come home and impact so many. Imagine what he could have done had he been able to get a second look, a second opportunity to come home and do this. And we're still fighting for it. So brings us to our discussion today is second look legislation. So we got a rally coming up November 12th down at the Capitol in Lansing, Michigan. Those are my listeners who are not from Lansing, Michigan. That is, I believe it's 100 North Capitol Avenue in Lansing. So we expect you. We want you. We are calling you all out to come down and support and rally with us. But let's talk a little bit about what this rally is really about, Chuck. So I guess, what is second look?
Right. So second look legislation is after somebody's already been down a long time. Right now the bill says 10 years. We may have to negotiate that up to 20 years. We're still trying to work that through. But they've already done a long prison sentence. And what we know is people who have already done that long prison sentence, their risk of recidivism drops through the floor. They grow up, they get out of the game, they become a lot safer. Not saying everybody, because this isn't a guarantee that anybody's going to get a resentence. But they're saying after they've already served a long time and we know their risk of recidivism is significantly low, let's have a judge give that case a second look and decide if the minimum sentence still makes sense. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because somebody's turned their life around like your mentor has. It could be because there's a case of a woman who was defending herself against her abusive ex, and he messed her up. Like, she lost her baby during his attack, and in self-defense she killed him, and she's doing life. I don't think if most people would look at that case now and be like, oh, she deserves life.
Right.
So it could be there's factors in the initial case that lead someone to say, like, we got this one wrong. Maybe the charge is technically correct. Maybe the charge technically fits, but a life sentence was inappropriate when you actually take a look back after this time. With the drug crimes that have, and how society's changed regarding some drug use, like maybe perspectives have changed as we learn more about brain science and how there's an impulsivity among young people that doesn't stop at 18. That maybe looking at that brain science, we need to give a second look at some of these cases. And what it allows the judge to do is, if somebody can show the mitigating circumstances that say, you know what, this sentence was not the right sentence, the judge has the discretion to reduce that sentence. Again, it's not a guarantee. We're not guaranteeing anybody a new sentence. We're just saying the judge can take a look. If the judge changes that minimum sentence, then somebody's available to go to the parole board, we want safety for our community, right? Because there are some folks who I don't want on my block. So the judge makes the first round, the parole board makes the second round, and if the parole board lets somebody out, they're on parole and they can come home, they can reunite with their family, they can give back in community. Like your mentor, I'm sure, could make a huge difference with youth mentorship and violence prevention and other things.
For sure.
In addition, Second Look solves two other problems that we have as a state. One is the staffing crisis. The Michigan Corrections Officers Union is complaining a lot about not having enough officers to run the facilities. And they're right, like the staffing crisis is hurting them. If somebody's pulling mandatory doubles, it does not make it safer in the prison. People are tired, they're angry, they're frustrated. That is a recipe for disaster. So the staffing
They're doing mandatory doubles?
Mandatory doubles.
I didn't know it was mandatory doubles.
I've heard from folks at the women's prison that when the shift's over, if they don't have enough people coming in,
you just got to stay.
They lock the bubble. You're locked in as a staff person until they get enough folks coming in.
Wow.
To get them to let you out.
Wow.
As a staff person.
Yeah, that's a crisis for sure.
So if we're able to take out the people in prison to let them come home who don't need to be there, who have changed their lives, who would be safe in community, who've grown up, that takes the pressure off our staffing crisis and helps make sure that the corrections officers, their families, they're able to have reasonable work lives and not be pulling these mandatory doubles. And then the third problem that this solves is budget, right? Like every budget season, there's a long list of things we want to invest in. Drug treatment, education, fixing the roads. Everybody's got their own pet projects. But each person who's held in prison costs $34,000 to $48,000 per person per year to keep incarcerated.
For sure.
And for some people, that's probably the right investment. For other folks, there's a lot better things we could be doing with that money that would prevent crime, rebuild our communities, and improve lives for everyone. So the ability to reinvest those funds in victim services and education and other things, that's the other advantage of Second Look.
So I've heard a lot kicked around about Second Look. And a lot of the, I guess, conversation is around what your part or your role was in your crime when you were arrested. How heavily is that going to be like? So, because there are people who did it. Like this podcast is for those who did it. Like we did it. We didn't. I wasn't a minor offender. I wasn't a minor part of the situation. I was the leader in my circumstance. So would those type of individuals be able to have their cases relooked at as well? Or does it matter what role you played per se?
So our goal is to give the judges the maximum discretion and opportunity. So my goal is to try to avoid carve-outs so that everybody can get a look, right? They can be evaluated. So if somebody is the primary person who is involved in a homicide, that is going to matter compared to were they an aider and abetter or something like that. The judge is probably going to look at that. Mm-hmm. But even if they were the primary, if they've turned their life around, and if they're safe to come home, the judge still has the ability to say, okay, yeah, you've served 20 years. And again, if you look back at Michigan history, that's actually historically, you roll back the clock to like the 70s, that's what people would serve for homicide one.
Life, yeah.
Well, no, they'd actually often be in for 20 years.
Well, I know when I came to prison, everybody the old heads used to say that life was about 20 years. Because I guess that was like a road rule, or not necessarily even in law, but that was like the way that they handled the procedure.
Right.
Because that was the thing. It was like, man, even guys who had been down longer than 20, I distinctly remember them complaining like, I should be getting paroled by now, or I should be getting to see the parole board because I've been down 20. They ain't seeing me yet. So I can attest to, okay, that makes sense.
That like, again, back to Governor Milliken and stuff, that's how it was. Yeah, after 20 years, they were letting people out. And Pete Martell is the guy who knows all the details on this, whether it was commutation or what that was. But that was our practice. We got away from that, and it's not helping anybody, right? It's not. It's costing Michigan taxpayers a lot of money. It's separating families. It's making it harder to fill the staffing vacancies we have. Like restaurants have to close earlier and open later because they don't have enough workers. Well, because a lot of them who could be coming home, could be doing a great job on the line, in the restaurant, in community, aren't getting that opportunity. And then that dollar cost number I gave you, that's not counting healthcare. So you talk about these old heads trying to get their prison healthcare, which is expensive and low quality. Well, like it's just adding up to that bill. Right?
So does that bill go away when they get out? I mean, so how does that transfer? Because don't they become a hassle or a problem for us out here when they come home?
So there's still medical costs, right? But if somebody, so let's take somebody, maybe they're 20 at the time of their offense, they do 20 years, they're coming home, now they're 40. They still got time to come home, reestablish themselves, get a job. They're not just drawing down on some of those costs. They're able to get a job, kick in for Medicare, kick in for Medicaid, maybe have a job that provides that for while they're working, put in money for their Social Security, right? So they've got something after when they get to be too old to work. And if that's not the case, there is Medicaid. There are other funding sources, but so it's a little bit of a shell game in terms of who's paying it, but especially for the folks who have had a chance to turn it around while they're still of working age, they can be contributing, not just draining. And the way a prison system's set up, it's just throwing people away and it's throwing money away. We can do better.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that we would be ready, like Michigan communities, if this was to pass, say, through the lame duck, this passes and it becomes the law? How many thousands of people will be coming home, and like, will we be able to handle that influx of that many people coming home?
So it really depends on where. So the vast majority of the cases are in Wayne County.
For sure.
So Wayne County, the biggest bottleneck, quite frankly, is the courts. The courts in Wayne County are already constrained. So then if you don't increase staffing and you add these cases to come through, that would be a burden on the courts. And we can solve that problem, right? Like we can put in the resources to hire a couple of other staff people, maybe a couple other judges to get through this backlog, especially the old cases. I don't want to make it sound like reentry, especially for somebody who's been down a long time, is easy. But again, second look is for the best case scenario, not for the worst case scenario. When I talk to employers, second chance employers, a lot of times what they'll tell me is it's the people who've done long prison sentences that are their best workers. Not the people say like, oh, I want somebody who did a short sentence for a nonviolent drug crime. Well, if they're still young, if they're still trying to mature, they may not actually be your best person. Right. You've seen this, right?
Yes, sir.
But the person who's like had that second chance, they got their life back, and they want to make amends on the outside for the harm they caused, and two, show that they are worthy of that second chance.
It's a whole different level of motivation to do right.
Right. And it's still hard, like especially the folks who've been like we've talked about some of the technology barriers and stuff like that. There's still some support folks need. Technology, job placement, there is a reentry psychological support system that needs to be there. But I actually think that this is an easier population in some ways to serve than the folks who haven't calmed down yet.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that being the case. Is this essentially an end to mandatory sentences in Michigan? Mandatory minimums?
So in Michigan, we've got a couple of offenses, homicide 1, CSC 1, and we've got the mandatory firearm enhancement for the felony firearm enhancement. Those would still
felony
be
murder.
Felony murder, which my understanding is that falls under the homicide 1. Even though,
Oh, well, yeah,
so
it's the same. Yeah.
So those are still on the books, but now they're, after that waiting period, there's a chance to review those sentences. So the way the bill, this is why this is a little bit technical, but there's actually 5 bills in the package. And one of those bills is to say, for these mandatory life sentences, it's mandatory life unless resentenced through the Second Look Act. So it's the initial sentence is still going to be life without parole, and then there's this way to review that on the back end.
Got you. So I guess my next question would be, if this passes, what's the next move? What's the plan for MI-CEMI, or what are we doing next? And if it doesn't pass right now, we don't get it in right now, what's also the next move?
So just to back up for the listeners, we're recording this at the end of October. Elections around the corner. Between the day after the election and the end of the calendar year is what's called lame duck. That's where we've still got the same legislators. They still have their jobs, but they've got a little bit of time. It's a long time before the next election. Some of them aren't coming back. So sometimes there's things that you get done in lame duck that you can't get done as easily other times of the year.
So I didn't want to put you on the spot with lame duck. That's why I didn't ask that question. But,
right. But I think it's important to
talk about it a little bit.
Like,
yeah,
we're trying to get this done before the end of the year. We think it's we've got a lot of work to do. It's not going to be an easy fight, but we think there's a path there. But if we don't get it done this year, it sets us up for next year. So if we don't get it done this year, we're back at it next year. So if we don't win, that is the we know what the game plan is. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason, I just want to lay one thing out here about why we're focusing on second look to deal with these long sentences instead of something like good time.
Okay.
We have truth in sentencing in Michigan. Truth in sentencing means that the parole board can't let somebody out before their earliest release date. Lawyers argue whether or not it would require a supermajority, but a lot of folks think that to try to change truth in sentencing would require a 70% majority in the legislature to overturn that. So the lift to try to get good time restored is actually a really big lift. Second Look goes around that by saying, parole board, you've got a new ERD. You're still not releasing anybody before their earliest release date. We've just changed what that earliest release date is, just like we did for the juvenile lifers.
That makes sense.
So tactically,
I'm glad you did that.
Yeah, tactically, that's why we're going for this.
Even though, for the record, I never agreed with good time as a thing. Even when I was in prison, I didn't think good time made sense as a thing, because if I come in and I'm gonna come in wild. If I come in with a lot of time and all of these things I have to make and stay out of trouble, and I know people who came down with good time with a lot of time to do. You did 10 years, you might have figured it out by the time you got done with 10 years, but you just killed all your good time in your first 10 years. And the makeup side doesn't come back as fast as the takeaway side. So they take away 300 days for an infraction, and then they give you 20 for doing good. It's like, by the time I'm done, I got, what did I get, 6 months off, a year maybe? I might as well just done the time. So I never was in agreement with good time as a thing. I never was looking forward to it. Mind you, I came to prison at the beginning of truth in sentencing. So my case was so new on the docket. That's actually how I was able to get back on appeal, was because the interpretation of truth in sentencing was so new that it was misinterpreted. My guidelines were misinterpreted, and I was able to, after case law came out that interpreted that specific, I think it was my offense variables. No, my prior record variables. Once the case law came out of how to interpret it, I was able to get back in court 11 years later. So, yeah. Anyway, getting back to that. So you said we're
so
not going towards good time.
So if we don't get second look this year, we're sticking with it for next cycle, and we're going to keep trying to add it. And the rally on the 12th is part of building that momentum. So either this year or down the pipeline. We think it's a good policy, and given the staffing crisis, we think this is the best way to solve that staffing crisis. After we win, what the next sentencing change is, I'll be honest with you, we haven't figured out what that exactly is. We have a lot of other parts of the system we're trying to address. We mentioned the police accountability, bail's in there, trying to continue to push for better programming, push more on the reentry side. So across those other pillars, we've got a number of other campaigns that are lined up and ready to go, and it'll be a process on looking at the sentencing thing. Are we trying to take on, there's a couple of things that are possible, but the thing about being a collaborative is we're not here to make decisions on our own, as if we're not the boss of the movement.
Right.
Right. We are a consensus-based organization, so it depends on our steering team coming together and saying, given the lay of the land now, what do we think is that right balance between something that is winnable and something that's impactful? And we haven't had that conversation yet.
Got you. So as we're nearing the wrap up, the last couple things I wanted to ask is, like, I'm glad you did touch on lame duck and why it's important to get involved right now during this time. So the next thing I wanted to kind of tell them is, what can they do? Like, what can my listeners do? What should people be doing? What should we be paying attention to? That type of thing.
Absolutely. So first thing is go to secondlookmi.org.
Secondlookmi.org. I'll put it in the show notes.
Excellent. And there's a petition there. You can sign that petition, and that not only does that show our elected officials that you care about this issue, that's also how we're able to keep in touch with you and keep you informed. Okay, here's the rally, here's the lobby day, here's another chance to get involved. So that really is a twofer in terms of showing your support, but then also connecting you more with the movement here. The second thing you can do, so when you go to Second Look Michigan, secondlookmi.org, that's within the MI-CEMI page, so signing up for the MI-CEMI mailing list, following us on socials. So whatever the issue is, we're able to keep you informed. And then the third thing is, I know a lot of the listeners to the 17 Winters podcast are either formerly incarcerated themselves or they've been touched by family. So you know the cases, you know the stories of people who are being ground down with excessive prison sentences, but would be good second look cases. We had an event in Detroit a couple weeks ago, and Senator Stephanie Chang was one of the speakers. And what she shared is that she has seen how these personal stories can change somebody's heart in a way that all of the stats and statistics and analysis will never reach someone. So you, given what you've seen, given what you know, you have a unique ability to engage with lawmakers and help to change their hearts. So sharing those stories in a way that shows the dignity and the potential in people who are affected by our criminal justice system is a wonderful opportunity. So reach out to your lawmaker. If you're curious how to do that, you can reach out to us at mail@mi-cemi.org, or reach out to Michael here and he'll get us in touch. We're happy to help you have that conversation. But your stories matter, which you know. I'll tell you what, our lawmakers don't know what you know.
That's true.
And by you sharing those stories, those examples, and reaching out to them heart to heart, that is an important gift to the movement, and I'm hoping that you'll share it.
Man, I think you summed that up perfectly. I think this was a great conversation. We will be ending there, man. Y'all make sure y'all listen to this a couple times so that you get all of the proper information, and pay attention to my socials. Pay attention to my collaboration. I think is how our Instagram looks. I can't remember. But look up MI-CEMI Michigan Collaborative and you'll find us. And with that being said, man, stay tuned. Free to real. Keep all the rest of them.